14-year-old boy pulled a blind girl from a drowning river, and nobody cared. Not the police, not the social workers, not the system that was supposed to protect them both. But one man did, and the people who wanted that man destroyed were already watching. Iron Road Home is the story of Caleb Mercer, a boy who learned to disappear before he learned to trust, and Ethan Cole, a scarred combat medic turned outlaw guardian whose biggest enemy wasn't a bullet or a blade. It was a courthouse. Stay until the end. This one will hit you somewhere you weren't expecting. If you're watching right now, drop a like and tell us in the comments. What city are you watching from tonight? Let's see how far this story travels. The storm came in from the northwest. The way bad things always came to Harlan County, without warning and without mercy. By 9 o'clock, the Coldwater River had already swallowed its own banks. Street signs disappeared under brown churning water. The old Route 9 bridge, a rusted iron skeleton that the county had been promising to replace for 11 years, groaned under the weight of the flood like something alive and terrified. Emergency vehicles lined both ends. Red and blue lights smeared across the surface of the river and turned the rain into something that looked like bleeding. Somewhere in the darkness beneath the bridge's lower support beam, a child was making the worst decision of her short life. Lily Cole was 9 years old, blind since birth, and absolutely certain she could find her father's voice if she just moved a little closer to the water. She had been waiting on the south bank while Ethan parked the truck. She had heard something below the bridge, a scraping sound, something struggling, and in the private logic of a child who navigated the world entirely through sound and touch, moving toward an unfamiliar noise felt more like investigation than danger. The concrete embankment was slick. The river was fast. And by the time Ethan Cole came around the front of his pickup truck and called her name, his daughter was already gone. He didn't scream. That was the thing people would remember afterward, that Ethan Cole didn't scream. He just stopped breathing for 3 full seconds, the way soldiers stop breathing when something detonates close enough to feel the pressure wave in their teeth. Then he ran, Seb. Caleb Mercer had been living under the Route 9 bridge for 6 nights. It wasn't a choice, exact. Choices were things people made when they had options, and Caleb had stopped pretending he had those somewhere around the 3rd foster home, when a man named Gary had locked the refrigerator and told him that food in this house was earned, not given. He was 11 years old at the time. He'd been moving ever since. Now he was 14, and he knew things most 14-year-olds didn't know. He knew which dumpsters behind which truck stops got restocked on Tuesdays. He knew that the warmest spots in any underpass were the ones farthest from the open ends, where exhaust heat from the road above filtered down through the concrete. He knew that eye contact with strangers cost you, and that the best survival strategy in any public space was to be so unremarkable, so perfectly forgettable, that the entire world simply failed to notice you existed. He had almost perfected it. I was lying flat on the narrow concrete ledge beneath the bridge's lower support structure when the storm got serious. His single wool blanket wrapped tight, a backpack wedged under his head, the river maybe 4 feet below his boots and rising steadily. He'd been watching the water level for an hour and running the math. Another 3 inches and the ledge would flood. He had maybe 40 minutes before he needed to move. I was calculating a new route across town when he heard the scraping above him. Then a small sound. Not a voice yet. More like a held breath suddenly released. He looked up. She was on the embankment slope above him, both hands pressed flat against the concrete, sneakers finding no grip on the wet surface, sliding toward the water in these terrible slow-motion increments that looked almost peaceful from a distance. Her eyes were open but focused on nothing, pointed slightly wrong, aimed at somewhere that didn't exist, and Caleb understood in a single cold second that she couldn't see the river she was sliding toward. He moved before he thought about it. Later, he couldn't explain that part. Every piece of his survival training said, don't get involved, don't get seen, don't spend what you can't afford to lose. Every scar Gary's locked refrigerator had left on him said, other people's problems will eat you alive. But his body was already off the ledge and climbing the embankment slope and reaching for her before his brain finished running the calculus. And maybe that was the thing about being 14 and damaged and still somehow not entirely extinguished. Sometimes the part of you that used to believe in other people moved faster than the part that had learned not to. He caught her wrist. She screamed, Hey, stop! Stop moving! The river's right behind you. His voice came out lower than he intended, stripped of everything except urgency. I've got you. Stop. She went still. He felt her shaking through the grip he had on her wrist, full body trembling, the kind that comes from cold plus fear plus the specific terror of being lost in darkness. Are you real? She whispered. Something about that question hit him in a place he hadn't known was still open. Yeah, he said. I'm real. They stayed on the ledge together because there was nowhere else to go. The embankment slope was too slick to climb in the dark with the rain still hammering down, and the narrow concrete shelf was just wide enough for two if they pressed against the support beam and kept their legs pulled up from the water. Caleb wrapped his wool blanket around the girl's shoulders without being asked. She sat with her back against the concrete and her hands folded in her lap, with that particular stillness that people develop when the world is entirely sound and texture and they need to hear everything clearly. My name's Lily, she said. Caleb. You live under here? He considered lying. For now. She didn't respond to that the way he expected. No pity, no judgment, no awkward silence. She just nodded like he'd said something sensible. The river churned 6 inches below their boots and threw cold spray across their faces. My dad's going to be looking, she said. Yeah. He gets loud when he's scared. Most people do. He's not most people. She said it quietly, as a statement of fact rather than defense. He just sounds like it sometimes. Caleb pulled his knees up and watched the water rise. His mind was already 3 moves ahead. How long before he needed to yell for help himself? Whether yelling would bring police, whether police would bring paperwork, whether paperwork would bring the kind of attention that ended with him in the back of a county vehicle headed toward another Gary. The calculation was automatic at this point. Survival math. He'd been running it so long it felt like breathing. Above them, the storm doubled down. The bridge moaned, and somewhere overhead, he could hear voices. Many voices, getting louder and more desperate. He heard the word Lily screamed into the rain over and over, getting closer and then too close. Feet on the bridge deck above them, flashlight beams cutting through the gaps in the concrete and swinging across the water below. She tilted her head toward the sound. That's him, she said. Caleb looked at the embankment slope, still too slick. He looked at the river, rising. He did the math one final time and accepted the result. He cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled upward with everything he had. She's here! What happened next came in fragments. Light everywhere at once, rescue flashlights, phone cameras. The brutal white beam of a fire department spotlight swinging down from the bridge. Voices layering over each other in the chaotic overlap of professional and panicked. Someone screaming instructions. Someone else screaming them differently. The bridge shaking under boots as people ran. And then the man. Ethan Cole came down the embankment slope the way gravity comes. Not carefully, not with any performance of control, but with the particular absolute commitment of someone who has made a decision and canceled every alternative. He slid the last 6 feet on his boots in both hands and hit the ledge without stumbling, soaked through completely. Leather vest dark with rain, a scar running jaw to collar on the left side of his face that looked like an old argument with something metal. He pulled Lily against him and held her and didn't make a sound. She pressed her face into his chest and said, I found someone. Ethan raised his eyes over the top of her head and looked at Caleb. The look lasted maybe 4 seconds. It was the kind of assessment Caleb had learned to recognize, the involuntary triage that adults performed on him the moment they processed what they were looking at. Dirty jacket, cut hands, no phone, no parent, no story that added up to anything comfortable. He watched Ethan Cole's eyes move across him and braced for the version of the look he usually got next. The slight withdrawal, the polite distance, the decision to make this someone else's problem. It didn't come. Instead, Ethan said, in a voice that sounded like it had been broken and reset so many times it had given up trying to sound soft, You stayed with her. It wasn't a question. Caleb said nothing. You kept her warm. Still nothing. Nothing. That your blanket? She needed it more. Ethan looked at him for another 2 seconds. Then he reached out and put one hand on Caleb's shoulder. Not gently, not with the careful performance of someone managing a delicate situation, but the way you'd steady someone standing near an edge, solid, present, certain. Come up with us, he said. The rescue teams treated Caleb with the professional warmth of people managing a liability. A paramedic checked his hands, noted bruising on his ribs without asking how it got there, offered him a foil emergency blanket and a cup of instant coffee from a thermos that tasted like burned cardboard and heaven simultaneously. A county social worker appeared at some point with a clipboard and the special calibrated smile that Caleb had learned to read as "You are a category, not a person." "Do you have a guardian present?" she asked. "No," he said. "Are you in the system currently?" "No." She wrote something down. "We'll need to contact. He's with me." Ethan Cole materialized from somewhere to Caleb's left, still soaked, Lily wrapped in his arms with her head on his shoulder, her small fingers twisted into the fabric of his vest like she intended to hold on permanently. I was looking at the social worker with the flat, patient expression of a man who had learned that certain situations required him to become a wall. The social worker looked from Ethan to Caleb and back. "Sir, are you illegal?" "Not yet," Ethan said. "He's with me tonight. The rest gets sorted out tomorrow in daylight when everyone can think straight. His name is Caleb. He pulled my daughter out of a flooding river. I'm not leaving him on a curb." The social worker wrote more things down. She looked like she was calculating how much this was going to become her problem. Caleb recognized that look too. It was the look that usually preceded him being moved somewhere worse. "I can arrange emergency placement." "I said he's with me." The tone didn't rise. It didn't sharpen into anything aggressive. It simply arrived at its final position and stopped moving, the way a deadbolt sounds when it engages. Not threatening, exactly, but definitively closed. The social worker made a final notation, clipped the pen to her clipboard, and gave Caleb a card with a number on it before she left. He looked at the card. He put it in his pocket. He knew from experience that it would take 2 to 3 business days for that number to connect him to anyone who remembered his name. The hospital was 40 minutes away, and Caleb spent most of the drive in the back seat of Ethan's truck, watching the storm dissolve in the rear window while Lily slept across both their laps with her head against Ethan's arm. Nobody talked. The heater ran on full and dried his jacket into something stiff and salt-stained. Outside, Harlan County passed in fragments. Shuttered storefronts, gas station neon, the particular desolation of a small American town in the wrong end of the wrong decade. Caleb watched it all and calculated, the way he always calculated. How long before the social worker's paperwork kicked in? Whether Ethan's goodwill would survive contact with the system that had been trying to process Caleb for 3 years and largely preferred not to. Whether the thing that had happened on that ledge, the blanket, the voice, the hand on his shoulder, was real or just a situation, and what the difference was between a situation and a person deciding. I was still running the math when they reached the hospital. The emergency room was bright in the specific savage way of emergency rooms. Fluorescent light that had no interest in mercy, tile floors that echoed every boot heel, the smell of antiseptic and vending machine coffee, and the invisible residue of every desperate hour that room had witnessed. Nurses moved around Lily with practiced efficiency. Ethan stayed close and responded to questions in short declarative sentences. Caleb sat in a plastic chair at the edge of the activity and tried to occupy as little space as possible. That was when he heard the motorcycles. Not one, not two. Something that started low and distant, like thunder reconsidering its position, and built in the way that large gatherings of large engines build, layered, rhythmic, each new arrival adding to the harmonic until the sound was physical enough to feel through the plastic chair and the linoleum floor and the soles of his boots. A nurse at the admissions desk looked up, looked out the glass doors, looked back down, said nothing. Caleb turned. Through the ER entrance doors in the floodlit ambulance bay, a line of motorcycles idled in the rain. He couldn't count them in the dark. Maybe 8, maybe 12, maybe more. The riders sat the bikes without dismounting, engines running, rain sheeting off leather and chrome. Nobody got out of their way. Nobody approached the doors. They simply existed there, heavy and patient and watchful, like something the night had decided to install permanently. A man broke from the group and came through the doors. Gray beard, broken knuckles, a face that looked like it had been in every argument a face could be in, and reached some kind of uneasy détente with the world. He walked to Ethan without haste, and stood close enough that they could speak quietly, and looked at Caleb while doing it, not with suspicion, exactly, but with the frank assessment of someone for whom reading strangers was a professional skill. "How's the girl?" he said. "Hypothermia. She'll be okay." Ethan's voice came out different now, still stripped of decoration, but lower, more private. "Kid saved her." The gray-bearded man looked at Caleb directly. Not through him, at him. "You hungry?" he said. Caleb said nothing. That means yes. The man reached into a vest pocket and produced 2 granola bars and a folded 20 and set them on the chair beside Caleb without ceremony, without expectation, without the particular performance of generosity that required him to witness Caleb's gratitude before it counted. Then he straightened up and went back to talking with Ethan. Caleb looked at the granola bars. He looked at the 20. He looked at the doors where the motorcycles idled in the rain. Something shifted in him then. Not hope exactly, because hope was a thing that had cost him too much to carry without examining it first. But something adjacent to it, something he didn't have a safe word for. He picked up the granola bars, left the 20, ate in silence. Well, the night moved through its phases the way long nights do, in terrible slow motion and then all at once. Lily was admitted for observation. A doctor with tired eyes and reading glasses pushed up into her hair explained to Ethan in calm clinical language what the cold water had done to a 9-year-old body and what the next 12 hours would look like and what to watch for. Ethan listened with the focused, still attention of a man who had once been trained to process exactly this kind of information under pressure. Caleb sat with them. Nobody asked him to leave. Nobody suggested he wait somewhere else. Ethan simply dropped into the chair beside him at some point, forearms on his knees, head forward, and they sat in the particular companionship of 2 people who were too exhausted to perform anything and had therefore arrived at something more honest. "You been out here long?" Ethan said after a while. "While. Where's your people?" "Don't have people." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He turned a paper coffee cup in his hands and stared at the floor. "You sleeping rough?" "I get by." "That's not what I asked." The directness of it landed differently than Caleb expected. Not aggressive, not the prelude to a lecture. Just a man declining to accept a deflection, the way a good mechanic declines to accept a repair that isn't actually repaired. "Under the bridge," Caleb said finally. 6 nights. Ethan made no sound. He nodded slowly, like that information was going somewhere inside him and being filed carefully. "How old are you?" 14. Another silence. The cup turned in his hands. 14 years old, and you covered my daughter with your blanket in a flooding river," Ethan said, "in the middle of the night, when you could have just moved on." Caleb said nothing. "Why didn't you?" The question sat in the fluorescent air between them for a long time. "I don't know," Caleb said, which was the most honest thing he'd said to an adult in approximately 3 years. Ethan looked at him then, a long, direct look that Caleb met because looking away felt like a kind of defeat. And whatever was happening behind those flat, exhausted eyes was something Caleb couldn't fully read. Something old. Something with weight to it. "You're not going back under that bridge," Ethan said. "That's not really your call." "Tonight it is." Caleb looked at the ER doors. The motorcycles had gone quiet, but they were still there, dark shapes in the amber floodlight, patient and permanent, and slightly terrifying in the way that things are terrifying when they refuse to be moved. "Those your people out there," he said. "My club. They always do that, just show up?" "When it matters." Ethan looked at the doors himself. Something moved through his expression. Not softness, exactly. More like the acknowledgement of a debt that could never fully be paid. "We've been through things together that don't translate to normal life. You either get it or you don't." "What kind of things?" The pause before Ethan answered was a full beat longer than it needed to be. "The kind that leave marks," he said. Caleb was almost asleep in the hospital chair, his head against the painted cinder block wall, when the footsteps woke him. Not the nurses. Not Ethan. 2 sets of footsteps, hard-soled shoes, the kind county officials wore, coming down the corridor with the particular purposeful rhythm that Caleb had learned, through hard experience, to read as documentation incoming. He was awake, and sitting straight before his eyes were fully open. 2 people, a man in his 40s in a county services jacket and a woman Caleb recognized, the social worker from the bridge, clipboard traded for a tablet, her careful smile recalibrated for official hours. "Caleb Mercer?" The man's voice was professionally pleasant. "We've been looking for you. I'm Marcus Holt, County Family Services. I think we have a placement that could—" "It's 2 in the morning," Ethan said. I was standing in the doorway of Lily's room 10 feet away, coffee cup in hand, leather vest dark and salt-stained, watching them with the particular quality of attention that required no physical movement to communicate complete awareness. "Mr. Cole." The man pivoted smoothly. I understand your involvement here, but protocol? Protocol. Ethan said the word like he was examining something he'd found in a gutter. You drove here at 2 in the morning over protocol. There are procedures for unaccompanied minors that require, he's not unaccompanied, he's with me. Legally, Mr. Cole, your club's history with county services makes this a more complex situation than something changed in the hallway. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. But the gray-bearded man, Roach, Caleb would later learn, came through the ER doors with two others, and they positioned themselves in the corridor with the unhurried precision of people who had done this kind of thing before. Not threatening, not blocking, just there, taking up space the way mountains take up space, without apology and without negotiation. Marcus Holt's professional pleasantness dimmed by approximately 30%. The social worker's carefully calibrated smile went offline entirely. Mr. Cole, Holt said, we're not adversaries here. We simply want to ensure the child's welfare. Then let him sleep, Ethan said. Come back tomorrow with your paperwork and your daylight and we'll talk. But he is not leaving this building tonight. He pulled my daughter out of a river. I will not repay that by handing him to a stranger in the dark. The corridor was very quiet. Caleb watched Holt calculate, the way Caleb always watched people calculate. The angles, the leverage, the political cost of various responses. He watched the man look at Roach and the two others. He watched him look at Ethan. He watched him look at Caleb, and Caleb met his eyes steadily and said nothing, because showing nothing had always been his best defense. Holt clicked his pen. Tomorrow morning, he said. 8 o'clock. Fine, Ethan said. They left. The corridor settled back into fluorescent silence. Roach glanced at Caleb once, then turned back toward the doors. The other two followed without commentary. Ethan looked at Caleb. You good? Caleb exhaled slowly. They'll be back. Yeah. With more paperwork next time. Yeah. And the time after that. Ethan nodded. Usually how it goes. He turned back toward Lily's door, then stopped. Without turning around. You know what they haven't done yet? Caleb waited. Asked you what you want. He went back inside. The door swung behind him. Caleb sat in the plastic chair in the buzzing fluorescent light and turned that over in his mind, slowly, the way you turn over something fragile that might be valuable or might be nothing at all, and you need to understand which before you let yourself believe in it. Outside, one motorcycle engine turned over in the parking lot. A low, patient rumble, like something keeping watch. He closed his eyes. He didn't sleep, because somewhere in the sound of that engine idling in the dark, in the memory of a granola bar placed beside him without expectation, in the particular silence of a man who had said, he's with me twice in one night without being asked. Somewhere in all of that, Caleb Mercer felt the first hairline fracture form in something he had spent 3 years building solid. The wall was still standing, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure he wanted it to be. I was still sitting there at 4 in the morning when the text came through on the communal hospital tablet at the nurse's station. A text intended for the county duty officer, routed wrong in whatever chaos the flood had created in the system's paperwork infrastructure. The charged nurse glanced at it, then glanced at Ethan's name on the room roster, then at Caleb. She closed the tablet, but not before Caleb, who had been watching everything, read the 3 lines visible on the screen from 8 feet away. Cole Guardianship Challenge. Accelerated. Donor confirmed. Remove the boy before the hearing. What? I didn't know who the donor was. He didn't know what the hearing was. But he knew, the way 14 years of surviving had trained him to know, that the men who had come at 2 in the morning with their clipboards and their professional smiles were not there because the county cared about his welfare. They were there for a different reason entirely. And Ethan Cole was in the middle of it, and so, now, was he. The text on the nurse's station tablet stayed with Caleb the way cold stays, not on the surface, but deep in the muscle, in the bone, in the place where the body keeps its most honest accounting of what it has survived and what it hasn't yet. Remove the boy before the hearing. He didn't move. He didn't change his posture or his expression or the angle of his shoulders against the cinder block wall. 3 years of living rough had taught him that the most dangerous thing you could do when you learned something important was to let anyone know you'd learned it. So he breathed. He kept his hands loose in his lap. He watched the charged nurse close the tablet and find somewhere else to be, and he filed her face and her decision away in the careful internal archive he'd been building since he was 11 years old. The archive was full of faces like that. People who knew things and chose the path of least paperwork. He sat with it until 6 in the morning, when the hospital began its shift change and the fluorescent lights went from oppressive to merely unpleasant. And a coffee cart appeared in the corridor, pushing something that smelled like actual coffee for the first time. He got a cup with quarters he found in his jacket pocket, 4 of them, shaken loose from the lining seam, and he stood at the window at the end of the corridor and watched the parking lot come into focus through the gray pre-dawn light. 3 motorcycles, still there, different riders than last night, he realized. The bikes were the same, but the men sitting them were different. A rotation, like a watch schedule. One of them noticed him at the window and gave him a small nod. Nothing performative, the kind of acknowledgement you give someone you've already silently decided is not a threat. Caleb didn't nod back. He drank his coffee and thought about donors and hearings and the particular quality of trouble that arrived at 2 in the morning with clipboards and professional smiles. Ethan emerged from Lily's room at 6:30, looking like a man who had been awake for 30 hours and had made his peace with that fact. He moved to the coffee cart, poured a cup without looking at the options, drank half of it standing at the counter, and then came and stood beside Caleb at the window. For a while, neither of them said anything. "She's stable," Ethan said finally. "Doctor says she can go home tomorrow if the numbers hold." "Good." Another silence. The parking lot was getting light. The third rider had traded off with someone new, a woman this time, solidly built, short gray-shot hair, sitting the bike with the easy permanence of someone who had spent more of her life on 2 wheels than 4. "That's June," Ethan said, following his gaze. "Club medic. She's been out there since 3. In the cold." In the cold. Caleb turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Why?" "Because that's what we do. For each other, not for—" He stopped. "Not for strangers?" Ethan looked at him sideways. "You're not a stranger anymore. You pulled Lily out of that water. Far as my people are concerned, that makes you—" He paused, choosing the word carefully. "Accountable for." "That's not the same as belonging somewhere." "No," Ethan said. "It's not." He finished his coffee. He looked at the window for another long moment. "The tablet at the nurse's station," Caleb said. "Last night, around 4. Ethan went very still. "I can read fast," Caleb said. The stillness lasted 3 full seconds. Then Ethan turned and looked at him directly, and the flat, exhausted expression had shifted into something more complicated, something that was making rapid internal calculations of its own. "What did you see?" Caleb told him. Word for word, the way he'd memorized it. 3 years of committing important things to memory because he'd never had anywhere safe to write them down. Ethan's jaw tightened. A muscle moved below the scar on the left side of his face. He looked away toward the parking lot, and for a moment Caleb could see something moving behind his eyes that wasn't anger exactly, older than anger, something that had been living in him for a long time and had learned to stay quiet. "You know what it means," Caleb said. "Yeah. The men who came last night, they're not here because they care about where I sleep. No. They're here because of you." Ethan's breath came out slow and controlled. "You should know something," he said, "before you decide what you want to do with that information." Caleb waited. 6 years ago, I testified against 4 county officials. Corruption, fraud, funds diverted from the foster system. Went to court, said what I knew, said it clearly. He paused. 2 of them went to prison, 2 didn't. The ones who didn't had a friend, someone with enough money and enough patience to wait until he found the right angle. "And I'm the right angle," Caleb said. Ethan said nothing, which was the same as yes. Caleb looked at the woman on the motorcycle in the parking lot. She was drinking coffee from a thermos, both hands wrapped around it, watching the hospital entrance the way you watch something you've been assigned to protect. "I can leave," Caleb said. "I'm good at leaving. If I leave, the angle disappears." "If you leave," Ethan said, "you go back to living under bridges." "I've been doing that." "You have." Ethan turned and looked at him directly again. "But now you know what's in that text, which means wherever you go knowing that a 14-year-old kid might have been used as leverage to destroy someone who spent 6 years trying to make something right, and you get to decide if that sits fine with you." It was the most unfair thing anyone had said to Caleb in 3 years. It was also the most honest. He stared at his empty coffee cup for a long time. "The clubhouse," he said finally. What's it actually like? Something shifted in Ethan's posture. Not relief, too complicated for that. More like a man watching a door he'd left open, waiting to see if anything came through. Loud, he said. Smells like motor oil and bad decisions. Coffee's terrible. Roach burns everything he cooks. But? Ethan looked at him. But nobody locks the refrigerator.
Boss.
They brought Caleb to the clubhouse late that afternoon, after Lily's second doctor's evaluation came back clean, and the paperwork for overnight observation was signed, and a club member named Decker, lean, late 30s, the kind of quiet that came from having been trained military and then choosing not to be, drove Ethan's truck while Ethan rode. The compound was on the eastern edge of Harlan County, set back from Route 9 by a long gravel road that crunched under tires like it was announcing arrivals. A converted machine shop formed the main building, corrugated metal walls now covered in years of layered spray. Primer and weather and the occasional deliberate mural. Nothing elaborate, just shapes, outlines, the silhouette of a hawk someone had done carefully in black against the east wall. A half-dozen bikes sat in the lot under a corrugated awning. A wooden building ran off the back. The whole place had the particular look of something that had been broken down and rebuilt repeatedly until it stopped looking like either thing and became a third thing entirely. Caleb got out of the truck and stood in the gravel and looked at it. It didn't look safe. It looked like somewhere that had seen a lot of hard weather and decided to stop pretending otherwise. But there was smoke coming from the chimney of the main building, and through the window he could see the orange rectangle of a wood fire, and the smell coming from somewhere in the back was coffee and something cooking, and all of that, the smoke, the fire, the smell, hit the animal part of him that had been cold for 6 nights in a row and said, warm. He picked up his backpack. Roach appeared in the main doorway, gray beard, those broken knuckles, a thermal shirt that said nothing on it, and boots that had been repaired so many times the original boot was essentially a philosophical concept. He looked at Caleb, then at Ethan, then back at Caleb. You eat today? He said. Coffee, Caleb said. That's not food. He turned back inside without waiting for a response. Caleb followed. The main room was exactly what Ethan had promised, loud in its bones even when quiet in the moment, carrying the acoustic memory of 1,000 nights of engines and argument, and the particular kind of laughter that comes from people who've stopped trying to impress each other. Scarred wooden tables, mismatched chairs, a bar along one wall that appeared to serve primarily as a surface to put things on rather than a venue for drinking. A board near the back with papers and photographs and what looked like a county map with certain areas circled in red marker. Caleb clocked all of it in under 10 seconds. Then he sat where Roach pointed, a chair at the table nearest the fire, and accepted a plate of something that turned out to be eggs and toast and potatoes fried in a cast-iron pan, and he ate it without speaking because it was the best thing he'd eaten in 3 months, and admitting that felt like too much exposure. 3 other club members drifted through during the meal. None of them made a production of him. A man named Priest, the irony of the name was apparently not lost on anyone, who was somewhere north of 50 with a shaved head and a prosthetic left hand that he used with complete unselfconscious efficiency, nodded at Caleb and poured himself coffee and sat across the room and read something on a phone. A younger man, early 20s, introduced himself as Ren, which was not a biker name anyone would have chosen deliberately, and was apparently some kind of inherited nickname from a childhood incident nobody fully explained. He dropped a folded flannel shirt on the end of the table without comment and said, "It gets cold in the back rooms," and disappeared into another part of the building. June came in from outside while Caleb was finishing his second piece of toast, pulling off gloves and a heavy jacket, still carrying the thermos from the parking lot. She looked at Caleb the way a medic looks at someone. Not clinical exactly, but the kind of attention that was trained to notice things people tried to hide. She looked at his hands specifically. The cuts from the bridge embankment, the bruising. "Those from last night?" she said. Most of it, she repeated, hearing exactly what that meant. She went to a cabinet, came back with a small kit, and sat beside him and cleaned the cuts on his hands with the quiet efficiency of someone for whom this was neither a burden nor a performance, but simply a thing that needed doing. She didn't ask him to explain the older bruises. He didn't offer. When she finished, she packed the kit and looked at him straight. "You're safe here," she said. "People keep saying that," Caleb said. "Does it get less true the more times you hear it?" He looked at his hands. Clean now, properly bandaged. His hands had been dirty for so long the cleanliness felt like a disguise. I don't know yet, he said. June nodded like that was a completely acceptable answer. She got up and left. The afternoon settled into the particular rhythms of the place. Engines in the yard, someone running tools in the machine shop bay, the low movement of Roach in the kitchen, preparing something that smelled gradually better the longer it cooked. Caleb sat with his back to the fire and watched and listened and performed, as he always performed, the act of being harmlessly present while absorbing everything. He noticed the tension before he had a name for it. It was in the way Priest sat with his phone but wasn't reading it. His eyes moved too infrequently for actual reading. It was in the way Decker came and went from the back room 3 times in 20 minutes without explaining where he was going. It was in the specific quality of silence that fell whenever Ethan was in the room. The silence of people who had something to say and were waiting for a context that hadn't arrived yet. He noticed Ren notice him noticing. Their eyes met briefly. Ren looked away first, which told Caleb that whatever was being discussed in his absence involved him specifically. At 4 in the afternoon, Ethan called a meeting in the main room. He said it simply, without ceremony, stood in the doorway of the back room and said, "Church," in a flat voice, and the building reorganized itself around that word with the practiced efficiency of people for whom it was a fixed ritual. Members came in from outside, from the machine shop, from wherever they'd been. Caleb started to move toward the back room. "Not yet," Ethan said. "Not unkind, but clear." Caleb sat back down. The door closed. He sat by the fire and listened to the muffled sound of voices through the wall, and looked at the county map on the board. The circled areas were clustered around 2 specific zones, the county services building downtown and something on the east side that he couldn't read from this distance. He got up and looked at it more carefully. The east side area was circled in fresh red marker. Inside the circle, someone had written a name, Hargrove. Below it, in different handwriting, "Donor confirmed," the same 2 words from the hospital tablet. I was still looking at the map when the meeting ended and the door opened and Ethan came back into the main room, and the look on Ethan's face told Caleb that whatever had happened in church had not gone the way Ethan wanted it to. Behind him came Priest, and then Decker, and then Roach, and Roach's face was the most readable of all of them, carrying the specific weight of a man who has lost an argument he believed in. "What happened?" Caleb said. Ethan looked at him for a moment. "Some of the members think you need to go to a proper placement," he said. "County home. Somewhere the club isn't the first thing the judge sees when he looks at who's vouching for you." Caleb's face didn't change. He had spent 3 years making his face a neutral surface for exactly this kind of moment. "Smart," he said. "It's not right," Ethan said. "It's logical." "Those aren't the same thing." "From where I'm standing, they usually are." Caleb looked at the map, at the name circled in red. "Who's Hargrove?" The room went quiet in a specific way, the kind of quiet that meant the name meant something, and what it meant was not simple. "Regional donor," Priest said from across the room. His voice was measured, the military precision still visible in the way he chose words. "Connected to county services for the better part of a decade. Funds several PACs, a couple of judicial campaign committees." He paused. "Testified against him, 6 years ago, with Ethan." "He testified too?" "We both did," Ethan said. Caleb looked from Ethan to Priest and felt the shape of something much larger than a flooding river, and a blind girl, and a boy, under a bridge, come into resolution around him, the way distant objects come clear when you stop trying to focus on them directly. "So this isn't about me," he said. "It never was," Roach said quietly. It was the most words he'd spoken in Caleb's presence, and the weight in them was enormous. "He's using me to get to you, both of you." Caleb processed that. "And if I stay here, I make the target bigger." "If you stay here," Ethan said, "you have people. And if those people go to prison because some donor bought a judge, Caleb." Ethan said his name the way you say the name of someone standing too close to an edge. Just the name. Nothing else. Caleb stopped. The fire crackled. Something in the kitchen hissed. Outside, the wind off the county hills pushed against the corrugated metal wall with a sound like something vast and indifferent running its hand across the building. "I need to think," Caleb said. "Take the back room," Ethan said. "Second door on the left. There's a bed." Caleb looked at him. "You're just going to let me think?" You're 14 years old and you've been making every decision alone for 3 years. Yeah, I'm gonna let you think. He met Caleb's eyes. But when you're done, I want you to tell me what you actually want. Not what's smartest, not what protects everyone else. What you want. Shub. The back room was small and smelled like cedar and motor oil and the ghost of old cigarette smoke, and the bed was a twin with 2 blankets folded at the foot and a pillow that had seen significant use and a wooden nightstand with a lamp that actually worked. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed with his backpack on his lap and did what he always did in unfamiliar spaces. Cataloged the exits, measured the distance to the window, confirmed the lock on the door worked from the inside. Then he sat there and tried to figure out what he actually wanted. It was harder than it should have been. What he wanted was not a concept he'd spent much time on. Wanting was a luxury that cost more than it delivered when you had no leverage to pursue it. For 3 years, his internal compass had been oriented entirely towards safe and fed and unseen, and those were manageable objectives with measurable outcomes. What Ethan was asking him to do was look past all of that at something softer and more dangerous. He pulled his backpack open and dug past the spare shirt and the emergency 20. The actual emergency 20, different from the one Roach had left him, the one he'd been carrying for a year and a half, and never spent because spending the last reserve always felt like admitting you'd run out of other options. Beneath the shirt and the money was a photograph. He hadn't looked at it in months. A woman, early 30s, dark-haired, caught mid-laugh at something outside the frame. On the back, in handwriting that wasn't his, Caleb, keep going. Mom. She'd left it in his jacket pocket the last morning of the last placement before the one that had ended with the refrigerator, before she'd stopped being able to come back for him. He'd carried it for 3 years as a fixed point rather than a memory, not because it comforted him, but because it proved he had existed as someone's person, once, before the system had shuffled the cards and redistributed everything. He looked at it for a long time. He put it back. I was lying on top of the blanket, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building settle around him. The voices muffled through the walls, the fire in the main room, the sound of boots on wooden floors, and the specific domestic percussion of an inhabited place when someone knocked on the door. Yeah, he said. The door opened. Not Ethan. Lily. She was in the doorway with one hand on the frame, head slightly angled in the particular orientation of someone navigating by sound, wearing a hospital bracelet that nobody had taken off yet, and an oversized club hoodie that came down to her knees and looking, in the orange light from the hallway, approximately 9 years old and approximately 40 years old simultaneously. Dad said you were back here, she said. He brought you back already? I told the doctor I was fine. I'm always fine. She said it with the flat certainty of someone who had been making that argument successfully for years. Can I come in? Caleb sat up. Sure. She came in, found the edge of the bed by touch, and sat beside him with her hands in her lap. For a moment neither of them spoke, and it had the quality of the ledge under the bridge, the shared specific silence of two people who had already been through something together and didn't need to narrate it. They're arguing about you, she said. I know. Decker thinks you should go. He's not mean about it. He just thinks it's cleaner. He's probably right. Probably. She considered this. But Dad's not going to do what's cleaner. He never does. She paused. It's his best thing and his worst thing at the same time. Caleb looked at her, the hospital bracelet, the hoodie 4 sizes too big, the eyes that looked at everything and saw a different version of it than everyone else. Why did you come back here, he said. To this room, right now. She was quiet for a moment. Because you stayed, she said. On the ledge. You could have moved when the water started coming up. I would have understood. I couldn't see you. I wouldn't have known. I know. But you didn't. She turned her head toward him slightly. I wanted to say it out loud. Not just think it. Thank you. Something in his chest did a thing he didn't have a clean word for. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. The 9 and 40-year-old certainty again. That's why I wanted to. He sat with that. Lily, he said. The man named Hargrove. Has your dad ever mentioned him to you? Her stillness changed quality. Different from before. Not the comfortable stillness of someone listening, but the careful stillness of someone who knows the answer and is deciding whether to give it. He's the reason we moved here 3 years ago, she said quietly. Dad thought he was done, that it was over. She paused. It wasn't over. How do you know that? Because 6 months ago, Dad stopped sleeping again. He only stops sleeping when something's coming. Her voice carried no drama, just observation. And now you're here. The sentence landed strangely. Not accusatory, not frightened, more like she was reading a pattern and stating what she saw. What does that mean? Caleb said. I don't know yet. She stood up, found the doorframe with one hand. But I think it means you ending up under that bridge wasn't an accident. She left. The door swung softly behind her. Caleb sat in the dark room with the cedar and motor oil smell and the photograph in his backpack and Lily's last sentence moving through him like current through a wire, lighting things up as it went. You ending up under that bridge wasn't an accident. He didn't believe in things that weren't accidents. He believed in systems and pressure and the random brutality of outcomes. He believed in what the evidence showed. So he started thinking about the evidence. Why Harlan County? Why that bridge? Why now, in this specific window before whatever hearing the tablet text had mentioned? How a donor with county connections and 6 years of patience would position a removal order for maximum impact on a man he wanted to destroy. He thought about it for 40 minutes. By the end of it, the blood had gone cold in his hands. Because if he was reading it right, and 3 years of surviving had made him very good at reading it right, then Caleb hadn't been placed in Harlan County by accident. His last assigned caseworker had requested the transfer, county to county, 4 weeks ago. A caseworker he'd never met in person, who had communicated exclusively through a county services email address, who had approved his placement in a Harlan shelter that had then closed unexpectedly 2 weeks after his arrival, routing him neatly onto the streets of the one town where Ethan Cole lived. Someone had walked him here like a chess piece. Someone with enough reach inside county services to move a 14-year-old boy across county lines and strand him on the right block at the right time, and then wait to see what Ethan Cole would do when a child appeared at the edge of his life in need of protection. The answer, apparently, had been exactly what Hargrove wanted. I was on his feet and moving toward the main room before the thought fully finished forming, and he came through the doorway with the photograph still in his hand from when he'd pulled it out to confirm the caseworker's name written on the back in his own handwriting months ago. The name he'd written because he'd learned to write down names of people who moved him, and he held it out to Ethan, who was standing at the table with Roach and Priest, and said, "The caseworker who moved me to Harlan County 4 weeks ago. Her name is on the back of this. I need you to run it." Ethan took the photograph. Looked at the front first, the woman mid-laugh, the handwriting, and his expression did something complicated and private that he controlled almost immediately. He turned it over, read the name, looked up at Priest. Priest was already on his phone. The room went very quiet. It took 40 seconds. Priest lowered the phone slowly. He looked at Ethan with an expression that Caleb couldn't fully decode, something between confirmation of a fear and the particular cold clarity that comes when you've been waiting for a thing to arrive and it finally has. "She's on Hargrove's payroll," Priest said. "Has been for 2 years, listed as a consulting associate on one of his development companies." Nobody spoke. The fire crackled. Roach set down his coffee cup with a sound that was very small and very loud at the same time. Ethan looked at Caleb. "They moved you here on purpose," he said. "Yeah." "To bait me into doing exactly what I did." "Yeah." Ethan's jaw worked. The muscle below the scar moved again. He set the photograph down on the table very carefully, like it was something that deserved to be set down carefully, and he looked at it for a moment before he looked up. "They have a court date," Priest said. "Emergency guardianship challenge. Filed this morning. Expedited calendar." He paused. 48 hours. The number sat in the room. 48 hours was not enough time to build a legal defense. It was not enough time to properly investigate a donor's connections to a county court system. It was barely enough time to prepare testimony, find witnesses, confirm documentation. It was, however, exactly enough time to make an outlaw biker and a 14-year-old boy with no legal standing look as unstable and dangerous as possible in front of a friendly judge. Caleb picked up the photograph from the table. He looked at his mother's face, mid-laugh, something outside the frame. He put it back in his jacket pocket. "I'm not leaving," he said. Ethan looked at him. "I'm not," Caleb said. "I know that's what they want me to do. Panic and run and make your situation cleaner. But if I run, they just find another angle, and I'm—" He stopped. The next word was harder than he expected. "I'm tired of running." The silence stretched. Then Roach said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "Kid sounds like someone I know." Ethan said nothing, but something moved across his face, something that had the weight of 3 years of not sleeping and 6 years of waiting for an enemy to show his hand, and a night on a flooding river believing his daughter was already dead. Something that looked, briefly and with enormous difficulty, like relief. He turned to Priest. "Get on the phone," he said. "Everyone. Full pull." He looked at the county map on the board, at the circle around Hargrove's name in fresh red marker. If they want a hearing in 48 hours, then we're going to give them something to hear. Outside, the wind hit the metal wall of the compound. Inside, the fire burned and the coffee cooled, and a 14-year-old boy who had spent 3 years perfecting the art of leaving stood still in the middle of the room and felt, for the first time, the specific terrifying weight of having decided to stay. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang. Then another. Then the first bike in the lot turned over. That low Harley thunder, patient and certain. And a second joined it, and then a third, and the sound built the way it had built in the hospital parking lot, layered and rhythmic, until the whole compound hummed with it, and Caleb stood inside that sound and thought, this is what it sounds like when people decide. He didn't know yet that Hargrove had already made his own decision. He didn't know that the expedited court date wasn't the weapon. The weapon was what Hargrove had already given the judge. And what he'd given the judge was Ethan Cole's sealed military file, the one that had been classified for 9 years, the one that contained 3 months in a military prison and a dishonorable discharge that had later been quietly overturned but never quite fully erased, the one that, in the hands of a prepared attorney in front of a compromised judge, would make every person in this room look like exactly the danger they'd spent years trying not to be. That information was 48 hours away from destroying everything, and Hargrove was already smiling. The sealed military file arrived at the clubhouse at 11:17 that night. Not by mail, not through official channels. It arrived the way things arrived when someone wanted you to know they had them. Hand-delivered by a man in a county services jacket who knocked once on the compound gate, left a manila envelope on the post, and was back in a black SUV and gone before Decker reached the gate from the machine shop. No name on the envelope, no return address, just Ethan Cole's full legal name printed in clean type on the front and a county clerk's stamp in the corner that was either real or an exceptionally good imitation. Ethan opened it at the main table with Priest and Roach standing behind him and Caleb sitting at the far end pretending to look at the county map. He read 3 pages. Then he set it down very carefully, the way he'd set down the photograph, and pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the middle distance for a long moment. And nobody in the room said anything because the quality of his stillness said everything about what was in those pages before anyone else read them. Priest reached for the file. Ethan didn't stop him. Priest read. His face did nothing visible, which was itself a statement. Priest's face did nothing visible when the information was bad enough that letting it show would cost him something he couldn't afford. Fort Bragg, Priest said. September 2015. Yeah, Ethan said. 3 months. Yeah. The discharge was overturned. In 2017. Quietly. Ethan's voice was flat and even and completely emptied of anything except information. Nobody put it on the front page. Nobody put it anywhere. That was the arrangement. Hargrove found the original. Hargrove found the original. Roach reached for the file. Read it slower, his broken knuckles white against the paper. His face moved, just once, just briefly, with something that was not surprise but was the recognition of a pain he understood from a distance. Caleb watched all of this from the far end of the table. He watched the way the file moved between them, the way the information transferred, the way each man processed it and added it to whatever internal architecture they were using to understand the next 48 hours. He watched, and he waited, and when nobody offered him the file, he said simply, "Tell me." Ethan looked at him. "I was 26, Ethan said. 3rd deployment, Kandahar province. My unit went into a compound on intelligence that turned out to be—" He stopped, started again. Wrong. The intelligence was wrong. Or it had been right and someone changed it and nobody told us. There were civilians in that compound and 3 of my guys didn't get the abort order in time. The fire crackled. 4 people died, Ethan said. None of them were combatants. I was the ranking medic on the scene. I had 4 minutes to make decisions that, again, the stop. Again, the restart, each one costing something. I made the decisions I made. The review board convened. They needed someone to carry it. The intelligence failure was above my pay grade, so they found something else. An order I'd technically violated 12 hours earlier, not related to the compound, something administrative, but it was on the record, and it was enough. They court-martialed you, Caleb said. Summary proceedings. 3 months in Lejeune. Then a dishonorable. He paused. Then in 2017, the intelligence report was declassified. Partially. Enough. A JAG attorney filed for review and the discharge was overturned. Upgraded to honorable. I signed something saying I wouldn't pursue damages, and they signed something saying the original proceedings were in error and everybody walked away. Except Hargrove kept the original record, Priest said. He has a friend at the Pentagon Records Office, Ethan said. I've always known he had access to things he shouldn't have. I just didn't know which things. Caleb looked at the file from across the table. He'd developed, over 3 years, the ability to read upside-down text with reasonable accuracy. He read the header of the 3rd page. Col. Ethan R. Dishonorable discharge. Conduct unbecoming. 09-2015. No mention of the 2017 overturn. No correction. No context. Just the original wound, preserved and aimed. A judge seeing that file, Caleb said slowly, especially a judge who's already been told what to think, sees a man with a violent military background and a criminal record trying to take custody of a runaway child, Priest said. Yes, and the overturn takes 30 days minimum to pull from JAG records, even with a court order. We have 48 hours. Priest set the file down. He timed it precisely. The room absorbed that. Caleb looked at Ethan, at the flat surface of his face, which was doing what faces do when the person wearing them has been hit somewhere old and deep and is making the decision in real time about whether to let anyone see how deep it goes. This is why you testified, Caleb said, 6 years ago. The trafficking, the foster funds. You testified because you knew what the system did to kids when the money that was supposed to protect them got redirected. Ethan looked at him. Because of what happened in Kandahar, Caleb said. You've been trying to... Don't, Ethan said, quietly. Not angry, just closed. The door swinging shut with that deadbolt sound again. Caleb stopped. They sat in the silence of a room full of men who understood each other's limits. What do we do with 48 hours? Roach said. His voice carried the particular patience of someone who had learned, through long experience, that the only productive response to a wall was to find the part of it that wasn't load-bearing. Priest turned to the county map. His prosthetic hand traced the circle around Hargrove's name without sound. We need the 2017 JAG file. We need it authenticated and in hand before the hearing. He paused. We need someone inside the record system who can pull it faster than 30 days. I have a contact at the regional VA office, June said. She'd come in at some point during Ethan's account and was standing near the door with her arms crossed and her face carrying the specific expression of a woman who had heard hard things before and was measuring this one against her prior inventory. It's not JAG, but she knows people. Make the call, Ethan said. It's midnight. Make the call. June went outside, through the window. Caleb watched her pace the gravel lot with the phone at her ear, her breath visible in the cold, the bikes in the lot lit amber by the one functioning overhead lamp. There's something else, Caleb said. Every head in the room turned. He hadn't planned to say it, or rather, he'd been turning it over since Lily's words in the back room. You ending up under that bridge wasn't an accident, and he'd been building the architecture of it slowly, carefully, the way he built everything, testing each beam before he put weight on it. But now, looking at the file on the table and the map on the wall, and Ethan's hand still flat on the scarred wood, the architecture felt load-bearing enough to say out loud. The caseworker who moved me here, he said. She's on Hargrove's payroll. We established that. He looked at Ethan. But think about the timing. He moved me here 4 weeks ago, before the bridge, before the flood, before any of this. He anticipated the bridge, Decker said, skeptical. He'd come in from the machine shop at some point, hands still dark with grease, leaning against the doorframe. No, he didn't need to anticipate anything specific. He just needed to put me in your radius and wait. Caleb spread his hands on the table. Think about it from his angle. He knows you. He's been watching you for 6 years. He knows what you do when a vulnerable kid appears near you. He's counted on it. He moved me here because he knew knew that if I showed up in your orbit, you'd do exactly what you did. The room was very quiet. He engineered the condition, Priest said slowly. Not the event. He didn't need to engineer the event. The county had already cut funding to the Harlan shelter. I found that out 2 days before it closed, from another kid who'd heard the staff talking. Cut funding, shelter closes, kid goes to the street, Ethan Cole finds him. Caleb paused. Hargrove cut the shelter funding. Ethan's hands came off the table. He stood up and walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room and his reflection looking back in the dark glass, and nobody said anything for a full 30 seconds. He used a child, Roach said. Not loud, barely above a murmur, but the weight in it was seismic. He used me, Caleb said. Yeah. You're still a child, Roach said. I'm aware. That's not... Roach stopped himself. His broken knuckles tightened around his coffee cup. He set the cup down because he needed both hands to do something with his frustration, and there was nothing to do with it. Ethan turned from the window. His face had gone through whatever it had gone through in those 30 seconds, and come out the other side into something colder and more specific. Not rage, which was hot and directionless, but the particular focused cold of a man who has located the exact nature of his enemy and is now running the arithmetic on what that requires. He's not just going after guardianship, Ethan said. No, Priest said. The hearing is theater. He wants us discredited publicly, on record, in front of a judge, so that whatever comes next, whatever he's building toward, we can't be credible witnesses. We can't testify. We can't organize. We're just dangerous bikers who tried to take a runaway child, Decker said. Yeah. Caleb looked at the file on the table, at his mother's photograph in his jacket pocket, at the map. What's he building toward, he said. Nobody answered immediately. The silence had the quality of a room full of people looking at the same thing from different angles and arriving at the same conclusion and not wanting to say it first. It was June who said it, coming back through the door with her phone in her hand and her face carrying new information layered over the old. My contact at the VA knows the JAG situation, she said. She can pull the file, but it'll take 72 hours minimum, not 48. She paused, and this pause was doing a lot of work. She also told me something else. Hargrove filed a development application 6 weeks ago for a county-owned property on the east side, former group home, 12 acres. She looked at the map, at the circle. He needs county services on board to fast-track the environmental review. He needs the sitting judge, the one hearing our case, to sign off on the zoning variance. And he needs anyone who might object to that process to be pre-stopped. Neutralized, June said. He's using the hearing to neutralize us, Ethan said. And if we lose, if we're on record as unfit, dangerous, unsuitable, we can't mount an objection. We have no standing. He gets the property. He gets the zoning. He gets whatever he's planning for that group home site, and nobody who knows what he is has the credibility to say anything about it. What's the property? Caleb said. June looked at him. The last recorded use, she said, was as a transitional housing facility for minors aging out of the foster system. The fire burned. The coffee cooled. Outside the window, the compound sat in the cold dark and the bikes stood in their amber light. And somewhere down the gravel road, a branch cracked in the wind like a small bone. Caleb sat very still. He's done this before, he said. The diversion of foster funds. That's what Ethan testified about 6 years ago. That wasn't the first time. That was just the first time someone could prove it. He looked at Ethan. How much did they divert? 6 years ago. How much? Ethan's jaw moved. The documented amount was $800,000, over 4 years. And the undocumented amount? Our estimate was closer to $3 million. Where does that money go? Caleb said. When you take money that's supposed to house and feed and protect kids who have nobody, where does it go? Nobody said anything. Because nobody needed to say anything. Because the answer to that question was the same answer it always was, in every version of this story, in every county, in every state where the vulnerable were administered by the powerful, and the powerful had learned that vulnerability was a resource. It goes into the machine that produces more vulnerability. He needs that property, Caleb said. Not for development. That's the cover. He needs a facility he controls, licensed through channels. He's already bought, populated with kids that county services routes to him. His voice had gone very flat and very certain. the way his voice went when he was reading a pattern he recognized because he'd lived inside it. I know what that looks like from the inside. I've been in 2 places that worked like that. Not this bad, maybe, but the same blueprint. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. I was one of his kids, he said. I just didn't know it yet. Nobody slept. The night moved through its phases in the compound with the muffled industrial energy of people working against a clock. Phones, laptops, paper maps spread across the main table with handwritten notes accumulating in the margins, the smell of fresh coffee brewed and abandoned and brewed again. June worked her contact list in systematic passes. Priest worked the legal architecture of the hearing with the focused deliberateness of a man building something that had to hold weight. Wren ran the county property records and the development application and the zoning board minutes going back 5 years, and reported his findings in low urgent sentences that Decker transcribed in handwriting so precise it looked printed. Caleb worked the caseworker. He sat at the far end of the table with Roach's personal laptop, offered without ceremony, password written on a piece of masking tape on the bottom of the machine, and worked backward through every piece of documentation that existed for his last 18 months in the county system. Transfer requests, placement approvals, shelter assignments, the funding cut that had closed the Harlan shelter 2 weeks after his arrival. He had no subpoena power and no legal standing and no credentials of any kind, but he had 3 years of surviving a bureaucracy and the specific skill set of someone who had spent that time learning exactly how the system documented itself and where the documentation leaked. He found the second caseworker at 2 in the morning, not the one who'd transferred him to Harlan County, a different one, earlier, 14 months ago, when he'd been in the Crestwood facility in the next county, a placement that had lasted 11 days before a licensing issue had closed the facility unexpectedly, and he'd been routed to a temporary shelter that had then transferred him again, beginning the chain that had eventually deposited him under the Route 9 bridge. The caseworker who had processed the Crestwood closure was named Sandra Reeves. Sandra Reeves had been employed by County Services for 7 years. Sandra Reeves had filed an early retirement claim 8 months ago. Sandra Reeves currently appeared on the payroll of a consulting company called Meridian Care Associates. Meridian Care Associates shared a registered agent with 2 of the LLCs listed in Hargrove's development application. Caleb stared at the screen. He thought about Crestwood. 11 days. He'd thought it was just another facility collapsing under funding cuts. There had been 4 in the county that year, all announced within weeks of each other, all attributed to the same state-level budget reconciliation process. He'd moved through the closure the way he moved through everything, quickly and without attaching to it. He had been routed, systematically, through a series of closures that were not random. He had been moved like a piece on a board for over a year. He turned to Ethan, who was standing at the map again with a cup of cold coffee. "How many kids were in Crestwood when it closed?" he said. Ethan turned. "I don't know." 14, Wren said from across the table without looking up from his screen. "I just pulled the closure report. 14 minors, all transferred to interim placements within 72 hours. "Where?" Caleb said. Wren's hands moved. The keyboard clicked. A long pause. 3 different facilities, he said. All 3 licensed through... He stopped. "Through what?" Caleb said. Wren looked up. He was 23 years old and had joined the Iron Road Brotherhood. 18 months ago, after a discharge from the Army Reserve and a year of not knowing what to do with himself, and his face right now was the face of someone looking at something they'd been abstractly prepared to believe existed, but had not fully expected to actually find. "All 3 licensed through Meridian Care Associates," he said. The room stopped. The keyboard stopped. The phone calls stopped. June turned from the... Decker looked up from the transcription. Roach set down his coffee. 14 children from Crestwood alone, all routed to facilities controlled by Hargrove's network. And Crestwood was 1 closure out of 4 that year. In 1 county, over 1 year. The arithmetic was not complicated. Ethan looked at the map. At the circle around Hargrove's name in red marker. Something moved through his face, slow, tectonic, the way damage moves through a structure long after the initial impact. "We've been thinking about this as a guardianship hearing," he said. "It's not a guardianship hearing," Priest said. "It's a cleanup operation," Caleb said. "We got close to something. Not on purpose. I got close to something by being moved here. And now he needs us gone before anyone pulls the thread." "The thread being you," Priest said. The thread being what I can document, what I can testify to, what I represent as a witness to a pattern that crosses county lines and goes back. How far back, Ren? Ren was already running it. His face said the answer was going to be bad before his mouth confirmed it. The earliest Meridian Care filing I can find, he said, is 9 years ago. 3 years before Ethan's testimony. 6 years before tonight. Ethan set his coffee cup on the map. He said nothing for a long time. Then very quietly to Caleb, "You understand what you're holding?" "Yeah." "If you testify to any of this, the caseworkers, the placements, the facilities, you become the central witness in something that goes way past a guardianship hearing. Federal level? Maybe. Organized fraud, conspiracy, possible trafficking charges. If the routing of minors was..." He stopped. "You become a target. Not just leverage, a target." "I know. You're 14 years old. You keep saying that like it changes what I know." "It changes what I can ask of you." Caleb looked at him steadily. "You didn't ask me anything. I found it." The fire had burned low. Someone added wood. Roach, moving quietly to the hearth with a log from the stack, performing the domestic act of tending a fire with the same grave attention he applied to everything, as if each small act of care was a statement about what a person owed to a space they occupied. The new wood caught, and the light moved across the room, and for a moment everything was amber and shadow, and the smell of pine resin and cold air coming through the gaps in the metal wall. 48 hours, Priest said. He said it like a stone placed on a table. Solid, present, final. "Not enough to build a full case," Decker said. "No," Priest agreed, "but possibly enough to make the hearing cost more than Hargrove wants to pay." He looked at the documentation spread across the table. The Meridian filings, the property application, the caseworker employment records, the chain of placements. If we walk into that courtroom with this, even half of this, the narrative changes. It's not a dishonorable biker trying to take a runaway child. It's a documented conspiracy using the foster system as a pipeline and a 14-year-old witness who can trace his own movement through it. "Hargrove's attorney will bury it," Decker said. "Objection after objection, chain of custody, authentication, minor witness. Maybe," Priest said, "but he has to bury it publicly, in front of a court reporter, on the record." He paused. "Which means he has to know what we have before we walk in. Which means if there's anyone in our circle who's talking to his side..." The sentence stopped. The room thinned. Caleb felt it before he understood it. A change in the air, a shift in the quality of attention, the specific recalibration of a room, when an uncomfortable question has been asked without being fully asked. He looked around the table. Roach, June, Wren, Decker, Priest, Ethan. He looked at Ethan. Ethan was looking at Decker. Decker was looking at the table. "Deck," Ethan said. One word, quiet, carrying the full weight of however long they'd known each other. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Decker's jaw tightened. His hands came flat on the table. He didn't look up. "I didn't tell him anything about the hearing strategy," Decker said. "I told him you'd taken the boy in, that's all." One text. 3 weeks ago, before the flood, before any of this. 3 weeks ago, Ethan said, when the boy was placed in the Harlan shelter. "I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know he'd..." "One text," Ethan said. "Ethan, one text telling Hargrove's man that I'd made contact with a child in the county system." Ethan's voice had not risen, had not sharpened, had simply arrived at a place from which it would not move. That's how he knew to accelerate. That's how he knew the bait had worked. Decker's face was doing something painful. Not the calculated containment of a man managing a lie, but the raw, ugly expression of a man who had made a choice he thought was small and was now watching it expand to its actual size in real time. "He had something on me," Decker said. "From before. 3 years before I joined. He'd been holding it for..." He stopped. "I paid it. I paid what he wanted, and I thought it was done." "It's never done with him," Priest said, and his voice was the flattest thing in the room, which was saying something. "I know that now." "You knew it then," Ethan said. "You knew what he was." Decker said nothing. Caleb watched this from the far end of the table and felt the architecture of the room shift, felt the truss that had been load-bearing crack along the joint where Decker sat, felt the silence change from the silence of people working together to the silence of people recalculating what working together now meant. He thought about the word betrayal and how it almost never looked like what you expected. It almost never looked like malice. It almost always looked like fear. "What does he have on you?" Caleb said. Everyone looked at him, including Decker, who met his eyes with the expression of a man who hadn't expected the question to come from that direction. "That's not your—" "If it's in a file somewhere," Caleb said carefully, "then Hargrove can use it the same way he's using Ethan's file. Whatever it is. If it's documented, we need to know what documentation exists before we walk into that courtroom." Decker looked at Caleb for a long, unreadable moment. Then he looked at Ethan. Ethan gave him nothing. No absolution, no rejection. Just the flat, patient attention of a man waiting to see what another man decided to do with the space he'd been given. Decker's breath came out slow. "Before I came here," he said. "Before the club. I was running transport for a logistics company in the valley. Contract work. I didn't ask what I was transporting because the money was good and I needed the money." He paused. "One of the runs was a vehicle with 2 minors in the back. I didn't know— I want to be clear, I genuinely did not know until I stopped for gas and heard one of them in the cargo section and opened it." He stopped again. His hands were completely flat on the table now, pressing down like he was trying to stop it from rising. "I didn't complete the run. I left the vehicle. I got the kids to a state police post 40 miles away, and I gave a partial statement, and then I ran because I was scared and stupid and 24 years old." He looked at the table. "Hargrove's company owned the logistics contractor. The partial statement had my name and my description of the run. He's had it for 6 years. The fire crackled. Caleb looked at the documentation spread in front of him. The Meridian care filings, the facility closures, the routing of minors through a network of controlled placements. He was running kids through that network even then, Caleb said. 6 years ago. Longer, Priest said quietly. 9 years ago, Wren's earliest filing. And Decker accidentally stumbled into one of the runs. Caleb looked at Decker. Not with contempt. Contempt required a certainty about what he would have done at 24 and stranded and scared, and he was honest enough to know he didn't have that certainty. And Hargrove's been using it to keep him quiet and occasionally useful ever since. Decker said nothing. The 2 kids from the vehicle, Caleb said. What happened to them? Decker's face moved. I don't know, he said. I never found out. The sentence sat in the room for a long time. Caleb thought about 14 kids from Crestwood, about how many other Crestwoods there were, about a 9-year-old blind girl who had nearly drowned because the same current that had built this entire apparatus had also, in its indifference, swept the one person Hargrove needed as a prop directly into the path of the man he wanted to destroy. He thought about his mother's face, mid-laugh, something outside the frame. I thought about what it meant that he had survived long enough to be here, in this room, with this documentation, with these people, damaged and compromised and furious and present, 48 hours before a hearing that was designed to bury all of them. He thought about the 2 kids from Decker's cargo run, whose names nobody knew, who had gone somewhere in the system 6 years ago and had not been found since. Something settled in him then. Not peace. Nothing about this was peace, but something adjacent to certainty. The specific internal alignment of a person who has been in motion for so long that stopping feels like dying, and who has just, in the space of a single night, found something worth stopping for. He looked at Ethan. I'll testify, he said. Everything, my placements, the caseworkers, the Crestwood closure, the routing to Meridian facilities, all of it, on the record. He paused. But I need you to do something first. What? Ethan said. The 2 kids from Decker's run, 6 years ago. Before we walk into that courtroom, before any of this, I need to know somebody tried to find them. The room was very still. Decker looked at him with an expression Caleb couldn't fully name, something that involved gratitude and shame and the specific rawness of being seen clearly by someone you'd helped to betray. Ethan looked at Caleb for a long moment. Then he looked at Priest. Priest was already reaching for his phone. I know a federal contact, he said. Investigator. She owes me. He looked at his watch. 3:14 in the morning. She'll answer. He stepped outside. The door closed behind him. And in the silence that followed, Caleb Mercer, 14 years old, 3 years running, a boy who had been moved across county lines like a chess piece by a man who had calculated that he was entirely expendable, sat at a table full of damaged, complicated, compromised people and felt the specific weight of having decided to stop moving. Not because it was safe, It wasn't safe. It was possibly the least safe position he'd been in since the flooding ledge beneath the Route 9 bridge. But for the first time in 3 years, the danger was in front of him instead of behind him, and there was something about that, something about finally turning to face the thing that had been chasing you, that felt, if not like safety, then at least like the priest's federal contact called back at 4:11 in the morning. Her name was Sandra Voss, and she was a senior investigator with the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General, and Priest had met her 7 years ago during the original testimony proceedings when she'd been running a parallel investigation into the same county officials from a different angle. An investigation that had been administratively closed before it reached indictment. Closed in the specific way that investigations get closed, when someone with enough altitude decides the cost of proceeding outweighs the benefit. She had not forgotten about it. She answered on the second ring. Priest stood in the gravel lot in the dark, with his breath clouding in the cold, and talked for 11 minutes while the compound sat lit and working behind him. When he came back inside, his face had the particular quality of a man who has received information that is simultaneously the best and worst thing he could have heard. He stood in the doorway and looked at the room. "The two kids from Decker's Run," he said. "Voss has them in a file. She's had them in a file for 6 years. Brother and sister, ages 8 and 11 at the time. They were recovered by state police and placed in the system." He paused. "She lost them in the system 4 months later, placement transfer to a facility she couldn't trace. She's been looking for the trail ever since." Decker made a sound that was not quite a word. "She's been building the same case we're building," Priest continued, "from the federal side for 6 years. Every time she gets close, the documentation gets rerouted, or the facility changes its license structure, or a witness stops cooperating." He looked at Caleb. "She's never had a witness who could testify from inside the placement chain. Everyone in the room arrived at the same understanding at the same time." Caleb felt it land on him like something physical. The weight of being the specific piece that a 6-year federal investigation had been missing. Not just a 14-year-old boy with a grudge against a corrupt system. A documented survivor of a documented pattern, with 17 months of traceable placement history and names and dates and facility license numbers, and the specific insider knowledge of what it felt like to be routed. "She wants to meet," Priest said. "This morning, before the hearing." "Where?" Ethan said. "Neutral. She suggested the VA office. June's contact there can facilitate." "How fast can she move on the JAG file?" "She has different channels than the VA contact. Military records liaison through OIG. She says 6 hours. 6 hours before a hearing that started at 9. Ethan looked at the clock on the wall. 4:13. "Then we need to move now," he said. They moved. The compound reorganized with the controlled efficiency of people who had been trained for various forms of emergency and had learned, through the specific education of living hard, to translate that training into civilian urgency without losing the discipline. June made 3 calls in 15 minutes. Ren printed documentation in clean, organized packets, 6 copies, each labeled, each containing the Meridian filings, the caseworker employment records, the placement chain, the facility closure timelines. Roach made sandwiches without being asked, moving through the kitchen in the dark, with the quiet competence of a man who understood that bodies needed fuel, regardless of what the brain was occupied with. Caleb sat with his backpack and watched and felt, underneath the urgency, the specific vertigo of being inside something much larger than himself, that was moving too fast to fully track. Lily appeared at the hallway door at 4:30. She was barefoot on the wooden floor, both hands at her sides, her head angled toward the sounds of the room. The keyboard clicks, the printer, the low urgent conversation, boots on wood. She looked awake in the complete alert way of someone whose primary sense is sound, and who had been processing everything that came through the walls of the back room for the last 2 hours. "I'm going too," she said. "Lily," Ethan started. "I heard everything." She said it calmly. "Not because I was eavesdropping, because these walls are thin and you were all talking at normal volume." She turned her head toward the printer sound. "I'm going. I know what I saw on that ledge, and I know what I heard in this room, and if someone needs to say it out loud in front of a judge, I can do that." "You're 9 years old," Ethan said. "Caleb's 14. You keep using that like it means something different than it does." She found the edge of the nearest chair and sat with the precise economy of movement she always used in unfamiliar spaces. He stayed with me on the ledge when he didn't have to. I'm staying with him now when I don't have to. She folded her hands in her lap. That's what this is, right? That's the whole thing you all keep doing for each other. I'm doing it too. The room was very quiet. Roach set a sandwich in front of her without saying anything. She found it by touch and took a bite. Ethan looked at his daughter for a long moment with an expression that had no clean name, something that was made up of approximately equal parts impossible love and the particular anguish of a parent, watching a child become the kind of person the world needs, and understanding what that is going to cost her. He looked at Caleb. Caleb said nothing, but he picked up his backpack. They left the compound at 5 in the morning in 2 vehicles and 4 bikes. Ethan, Caleb, Lily, and June in the truck, Priest and Roach on bikes ahead, Ren and a club member named Soto behind. The gravel road crunched under tires, and the cold outside was the specific pre-dawn cold of late November that carries ice in it, the kind of cold that finds every gap in a jacket and reminds you that the world is indifferent to your timeline. Route 9 was empty. The bridge repair lights were still running at the south end, orange cones and yellow tape, and the ghost of the flood in the waterline stains on the embankment. And Caleb watched it through the truck window as they crossed and felt the particular physical memory of cold water and a small hand gripping his wrist, and filed it in the place where he kept things that had changed him. The VA office was on the west side, a 2-story brick building between a pharmacy and a closed diner, its parking lot empty except for a single dark sedan idling in the corner with its lights off. Sandra Voss was not what Caleb had pictured from Priest's description. She was somewhere in her late 40s, medium height, the kind of face that had been doing hard work for a long time and had developed, in response, the specific quality of someone who no longer wasted energy on expressions that didn't serve a purpose. She wore a dark coat and carried a leather bag, and looked at each person who came through the VA side door with the rapid professional assessment of someone who had been reading rooms full of complicated people for 20 years. She looked at Caleb last. The assessment lasted 3 full seconds. You're the placement chain. She said. Yeah, he said. How much of it can you document from memory? 17 months. Every facility, every transfer, every caseworker name I can remember. I've been writing them down. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. Not his mother's photograph. A different pocket. A different paper. Something he'd been building slowly in the margins of the county map documentation while everyone else worked their phones. Names and dates in his small, careful handwriting. The archive he kept because he'd never had anywhere safe to store it except his own memory and whatever surface was available. Voss took it, read it. Her face changed, just slightly, just briefly, but enough. The Crestwood closure, she said. Sandra Reeves. She's on Hargrove's payroll. Wren confirmed it through the LLC registration. Voss looked at Priest. Your people did this in one night. We had motivation, Priest said. She opened her bag, pulled a folder, set it on the VA reception desk. June's contact had unlocked the building and retreated to a back office with the diplomatic instinct of someone who understood when to be present and when to be furniture. The folder contained federal documentation that Caleb couldn't fully process in real time. Transaction records, facility inspection reports, OIG investigation summaries. But he caught the dates going back 9 years and the dollar figures that appeared in the first 3 pages, and understood from those figures alone the scale of what had been running beneath the surface of the county services system for nearly a decade. 3.4 million documented, Voss said. Funds diverted from state and federal foster care allocations through a network of shell facilities, all licensed through entities connected to Hargrove's holding companies. The Meridian Care filings you found tonight are the most recent layer. There are 4 previous corporate structures, each dissolved and reformed as the investigation got close. She looked at the room. What I have is a financial case, strong documentation, clear paper trail, federal jurisdiction. What I don't have, she paused, what I have never been able to get, is a human witness, someone who can testify from inside the placement chain, someone who can stand up in a federal proceeding and say, this is where they moved me, this is who authorized it, this is what the conditions were. She looked at Caleb. He looked back. You're asking me to testify in a federal case, he said. I'm telling you that if the guardianship hearing today puts your documentation on a court record, even a state court record, it creates the evidentiary bridge I need to move the federal case from investigation to prosecution. She paused. You'd be the bridge. He's 14 years old, Ethan said. His voice had an edge in it that was not anger exactly, but was the specific controlled force of a man drawing a line. I know how old he is, Voss said. Not unkind, but certain. You're asking a kid who's been in the system his whole life to put himself back in front of the system as a target. He's already a target, Voss said. Hargrove moved him here deliberately. He's been a target for at least 14 months. The question isn't whether he's in danger. He is. The question is whether that danger is pointed at him alone in a county system that Hargrove controls, or whether it's pointed at him in a federal proceeding where I can put protection around him. The room took that in. Caleb looked at Lily, who was sitting in a VA waiting room chair with her hands in her lap and her head tilted slightly toward the conversation, processing it through sound the way she processed everything. He looked at Ethan. Ethan's face was doing the complicated private calculation again, the one that involved everything he'd lost and everything he was trying to hold on to, and the permanent tension between protecting the people near him and understanding that protection sometimes required a different kind of exposure. The JAG file, Ethan said to Voss. The dishonorable discharge from 2015. Hargrove's going to walk it into that courtroom this morning. I know about the file, Voss said. Can you? I've already contacted the JAG liaison. She looked at her watch. 5:42. The authenticated overturned documentation will be at the courthouse by 8:30. She paused. I've also filed an emergency motion with the federal district court for a protective order covering the hearing. It won't stop the proceedings, but it will put Hargrove's attorney on notice that the federal government has an interest in the outcome. She looked at Ethan directly. He knows about my investigation. He's known for years. What he doesn't know is how close it is. Today's hearing was designed to slow me down by destroying your credibility as a potential witness. If you walk in there with what you have, all of it, Caleb's documentation, the Meridian filings, Decker's testimony about the transport run. Decker testifies? Ethan said. If he's willing. His partial statement from 6 years ago is already in my file. His testimony today, corroborated by Caleb's placement documentation, gives the federal case something it's never had. A connected timeline from the transport operation to the placement network to the current development application. She closed the folder. I can't promise the judge rules in your favor today. I can't promise Hargrove's attorney doesn't land blows. What I can promise is that if you do this, if you put all of it on the record today, I can move within 72 hours on the federal arrest warrants. 72 hours. 3 days. After 9 years. The VA waiting room hummed with its fluorescent quiet. Through the window, the parking lot was starting to get light. That thin gray November light that arrived without warmth and made everything look like it was being seen through a layer of ice. Ethan looked at Caleb. It's your call, he said. Caleb sat with that for a moment. The weight of it. The specific gravity of being 14 years old and being told by an adult that something this large was his call. He thought about the 2 kids from Decker's cargo run, 6 years old and 9 years old, thrown into a system that routed them to facilities controlled by the man who'd put them there, and somewhere in the subsequent transfers and closures and license reformations, disappeared into a documentation gap that a federal investigator had been trying to close for half a decade. He thought about 14 kids from Crestwood alone, about how many Crestwoods there were. He thought about his mother's face. He thought about the ledge under the bridge, and how he'd moved before he thought about it, and how maybe that was the only honest answer he'd ever had to the question of what kind of person he was. Okay, he said. One word. Voss nodded once. We go in at 9, she said. What? The 3 hours between 5:42 and 9 o'clock had the quality of the hours before something irreversible, stretched and compressed simultaneously, filled with the specific texture of preparation that knows it is preparation for the last preparation. They went back to the compound briefly. Showers, clean clothes. Wren produced a collared shirt for Caleb from somewhere that fit well enough to communicate effort without looking performative, and Caleb put it on in the back room and looked at himself in the small mirror above the dresser and did not recognize himself, which was disorienting and also, somehow, correct. Decker came to the back room door at 7:15. He knocked. Come in, Caleb said. Decker stood in the doorway with his hands in the front pockets of his jeans, wearing the expression of a man who had prepared something to say and was finding, now that he was in the room, that the preparation was inadequate. I'm testifying, he said. I know. About the transport run. Everything. He paused. 6 years I've been. He stopped. I should have done it then. I know I should have done it then. You were 24. That's not an excuse. No, Caleb said. It's not, but it's a reason. There's a difference. He looked at Decker. The two kids from the cargo run. If Voss finds them, when she finds them, what do you want them to know about what you did? Not what you didn't do, what you did. Decker's face worked. I stopped, he said. I stopped the run and I got them out. Then that's what they'll know, Caleb said. Decker stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he nodded once, the way men nod when words have run out, and the only honest response is acknowledgement, and he left. The courthouse was a gray stone building on Harlan County's main square, 3 stories, American flag and state flag on poles at the entrance, the flags limp in the cold morning air. By 8:15, the steps were populated. Reporters, a county news camera, 3 men in dark coats who stood at the perimeter with the particular careful stillness of people who had been positioned rather than arrived. Hargrove's people. Caleb clocked them from the truck window as they pulled into the courthouse lot. He clocked the black SUVs on the street, 2 of them, positioned at angles that were too deliberate for parking. He clocked the attorney on the courthouse steps in an expensive coat checking his phone with the compressed energy of a man who had been told the outcome of today's proceedings before they began and was waiting for the formality to confirm it. He clocked all of it and felt his pulse in his throat and breathed through it and stepped out of the truck. The cold hit his face and his hands and the thin soles of Wren's borrowed shoes on the pavement. Behind him, bikes. Not 3, not 8, not the cluster from the hospital parking lot. Dozens. They came from the north end of the square first, a line of headlights in the gray morning, engines at low rumble, the sound building the way it always built when there were enough of them, layered and rhythmic and deeply physical. Then from the south end, more. Then from the side street that fed into the square's east corner, a stream of riders that took 2 full minutes to resolve itself from a line into a group and then from a group into a presence. Veterans, teachers, nurses. 2 men in county fire department jackets, a woman in a teacher's lanyard, an older man on a low Honda who was not a biker by any observable measure, but had come because someone had called someone who had called him, and he had decided that today was a day for showing up. They parked in the lot and along the street and did not chant, and did not carry signs, and did not make speeches. They stood near their machines in the cold morning with their breath clouding and their boots on the wet pavement, and they were simply, enormously, undeniably there. Caleb stood on the courthouse steps and looked at them. He had been moved through the county system for 17 months. He had been under a bridge for 6 nights. He had been on a flooding ledge and in a hospital waiting room and at a compound table at 3 in the morning, building a case out of LLC registrations and employment records, and the specific painful memories of every facility that had processed him and released him into the next one. He had never, in any of those places, seen this. People who came because a phone call asked them to. People who stood in the cold because the alternative was not standing there. People who had no official power and no legal standing and no guarantee that their presence meant anything except the fact of it. The bare, stubborn, enormous fact of people choosing to be somewhere. He felt Ethan beside him. Ready? Ethan said. Caleb looked at the courthouse doors, at Hargrove's attorney on the steps, who had stopped checking his phone and was looking at the parking lot with an expression that was the first crack in his prepared certainty. Yeah, Caleb said. They went up the steps. The attorney looked at them as they passed, looked at Voss, who was behind them, with her federal credentials and her folder, and the precise contained energy of a woman walking toward 9 years of work. Looked at Priest, who met his eyes with the flat military patience of a man who had decided to be unmovable and was simply waiting for the other person to finish deciding whether to test that. The attorney said nothing. They went through the doors. The courtroom was smaller than Caleb had imagined. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, that particular institutional smell of old paper and cleaning solution, and the accumulated anxiety of every person who had ever sat in these chairs needing something and not being sure they'd get it. The judge was already on the bench. 60-something, gray-haired, reading something when they entered, the face professionally neutral in the way that faces are neutral when they have already made their decision and are waiting for the proceedings to justify it. Hargrove sat at the opposing table. Caleb had not known what to expect. He'd built a mental image from the name and the documentation. something large and obvious, the visible architecture of a man who used power carelessly. What he saw was someone thin and patient in a good suit, somewhere north of 60, with the specific quality of stillness that comes not from calm, but from the long practice of not revealing anything too early. He did not look at Caleb when they entered. He looked at Voss. His face changed. Just for a moment. Just a hairline fracture in the professional stillness. But Caleb was 14 years old and had spent 3 years reading the faces of people who held power over him, and he caught it. The recognition, the rapid recalculation, the understanding that something in today's proceedings had changed shape. Then the stillness came back, and Hargrove's eyes moved to Caleb, calm, direct, assessing. Caleb held the eye contact. He thought about the 2 kids in a cargo vehicle, about 14 kids from Crestwood, about every facility in the placement chain, every caseworker with a second employer, every dollar that had been redirected from the protection of children into the machine that made them more vulnerable. He thought about staying on the ledge. He didn't look away. The judge called the court to order. Hargrove's attorney stood and opened with the military file, led with it, the way you lead with your most prepared weapon, clean and practiced, the words dishonorable discharge placed in the room with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the acoustics. He made Ethan sound dangerous. He made the compound sound like a threat. He constructed, in 7 minutes of careful legal language, the story that Hargrove had designed. The outlaw biker, the runaway child, the irresponsible exposure of a minor to a criminal environment. Ethan sat still through all of it, his hands flat on the table, his face doing nothing visible. Then Voss's emergency motion came before the court, and the judge, the friendly judge, the prepared judge, the judge who had already decided, looked at it with the expression of a man who has stepped on something unexpected in the dark. The Federal Protective Order. The OIG interest notation. Voss stood. She was not representing a party in the proceedings. She had federal standing as an interested investigator, and she used it with the quiet devastation of someone who had been waiting a long time for exactly this moment. She put the Meridian Care documentation on the record. She put the caseworker employment records on the record. She referenced, without full disclosure, with the precise, careful language of someone protecting an active investigation, the existence of a documented placement network connected to the opposing party that was currently the subject of federal inquiry. The courtroom changed. Hargrove's attorney was on his feet immediately. Objections layered over each other, chain of custody, relevance, foundation. And the judge was sustaining some of them, but not all of them. And the ones he wasn't sustaining were the ones that mattered, because they were already on the record, already said, already existing in the room in a way that could not be fully taken back. And then Lily was called. She walked to the stand with one hand on the railing and sat with her hands in her lap and her head angled forward. And the courtroom went very quiet in the specific way. Courtrooms go quiet when something that was supposed to be a formality has become something else. The attorney asked her about the bridge, about the flood, about Ethan, about the compound. His questions were constructed to make the answers sound like danger, and Lily answered each one in her flat, clear voice with the specific precision of someone who had been navigating a world of imprecise information her entire life and had therefore become very accurate. Then Ethan's attorney asked her one question. Lily, when you were on the ledge under the bridge, in the dark, in the cold, with the river rising, what did Caleb do? She was quiet for a moment. He didn't leave, she said. Can you tell the court what you mean by that? She turned her head slightly. That orientation toward sound, toward the room, toward whatever she was reading in the air of the place. Everyone was loud, she said. The storm, the rescue people, my dad calling my name. Everything was loud, but he was quiet. He put his blanket around me and he said, I've got you, and he didn't move. She paused. I knew he was scared. I could hear it. His breathing was scared, but he stayed. Another pause. I've had people leave when things got hard my whole life. Everyone has. He didn't leave. She folded her hands more tightly in her lap. That's what I mean. The courtroom held that. Hargrove's attorney did not cross-examine Lily. Caleb was called next. He walked to the stand and sat and looked at the room. The judge, the attorney, Hargrove, at the opposing table with his stillness and his good suit, Ethan and Voss and Priest and Roach along the gallery wall, the court reporter's fingers over her keys, the county news camera in the back. and he thought about the photograph in his jacket pocket, and about his mother's voice saying, "Keep going," and about what it meant to finally, after 3 years of running, stop in front of something and refuse to move. He put his hand on the table. He looked at the judge. The judge was looking back at him with an expression that had shifted, subtly, carefully, but visibly, from the prepared certainty of this morning to something more complicated and less decided. Ethan's attorney said, "Caleb, please tell the court about your placement history over the last 17 months. Caleb breathed. He opened his mouth. And from the back of the courtroom, a door opened. Not the main doors. The side door, the one that led to the court administrative offices, the one that court staff used. A man came through it. Mid-50s, federal ID visible on a lanyard, moving with the specific controlled urgency of someone who has news and knows it changes the shape of the room. He went directly to Voss. He bent to her ear. Voss's face went through something. Not surprised, because she had been expecting something like this, but the specific controlled response of a person receiving a confirmation that something they've worked toward for 9 years has just become real. She straightened. She looked at Hargrove. Hargrove was already looking at her. And in that exchange, 4 seconds across a courtroom, no words, no movement, just the locked gaze of a predator and the investigator who had been tracking him for nearly a decade, Caleb saw it happen. Saw the stillness in Hargrove's face develop, finally, the hairline fracture that spread. Saw the recalculation become a recalculation of a different kind. Saw the man who had moved chess pieces across county lines for 9 years look at the board, and the man Voss had been watching for 9 years understood, in the space of 4 seconds across a courtroom, that the board had changed. Caleb watched it happen the way he watched everything, from the outside, reading the micro-expressions, the incremental failures of composure. Hargrove's attorney was already on his feet moving toward his client when the federal agent handed Voss a second document, and whatever passed between Hargrove and his attorney in the 6 seconds of whispered consultation that followed had the specific quality of a calculation that no longer computed. The attorney straightened, cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said, "the opposing party requests a brief recess." The judge looked from the attorney to Voss to the federal agent still standing at the gallery rail with his lanyard and his controlled urgency. I was a man who had been prepared for a certain kind of morning and was now sitting inside a different morning entirely. And the intelligence behind his eyes, whatever compromises he had made, whatever arrangements had seemed reasonable 6 months ago, when Hargrove's money was a future and federal scrutiny was a theoretical, was doing rapid and visible work. 10 minutes, the judge said. The gavel came down. In the corridor outside the courtroom, Voss spoke in a low voice to Ethan and Priest, while Caleb stood near the window and watched the parking lot below. The bikes still there, the people still there, boots on wet pavement and breath in cold air, the enormous patient fact of them. "The federal agent brought warrant documentation," Voss said. "My office moved faster than I expected. The arrests are authorized. Hargrove, 2 of the caseworkers, the registered agent for Meridian Care, and 3 county officials." She paused. "It won't happen inside the courtroom. The arrests are being coordinated separately, but Hargrove's attorney knows. That's what the recess is for." "He'll withdraw," Priest said. "He'll advise his client to withdraw the challenge and cooperate with federal proceedings, which is not the same as cooperating, but it ends the hearing." "The judge," Ethan said. Voss looked at him steadily. "Is going to have a difficult few months. His connection to Hargrove's campaign contributions is documented, whether that rises to criminal conduct or remains a matter of professional consequences." She paused. "That's a different proceeding." Ethan said nothing. "The JAG file," Voss continued. "The authenticated overturned documentation is on record with the court as of 8:43 this morning. Whatever happens in the next 10 minutes, that file is corrected, permanently." She looked at him directly. "That part is done." Something moved through Ethan's face. A slow, tectonic shift. Not relief exactly, because relief implies the weight has been removed, and the weight of those 4 people in a compound in Kandahar province did not remove itself, would never fully remove itself. But something. Some degree of the held breath releasing. He nodded once. Caleb looked at the parking lot, at the people standing in the cold. "The 2 kids," he said, "from Decker's Run." Voss turned. "My investigator found a placement record for 2 minors matching the description, a girl and a boy, ages consistent, at a Meridian Care facility in the adjacent county." She paused, and the pause carried everything it needed to. The facility was closed 14 months ago during a state licensing review. The children were transferred to state protective custody at that point. Another pause. They're in a stable placement, together, in the same home. Caleb absorbed that. Together, in the same home. He didn't say anything. He turned back to the window and looked at the parking lot, and breathed slowly, and let that information settle into the specific internal space where he kept the things that were too important to react to immediately. Decker was standing 20 feet down the corridor with his back against the wall and his arms crossed, and his face doing the private arithmetic of a man who has just been told that something he stopped and something he didn't do were both, somehow, part of the same ledger. Caleb looked at him. Decker looked back. Neither of them said anything. Sometimes that was the whole conversation. Well, the recess lasted 14 minutes. Hargrove's attorney returned to the courtroom and withdrew the emergency guardianship challenge with the compressed professional language of someone being very careful about every word that entered the court record. He cited procedural grounds. He cited the emergence of new evidentiary considerations. He did not cite the federal warrants or the OIG investigation or the 9 years of documentation that had finally reached the weight required to move. The judge granted the withdrawal without comment. Extended temporary guardianship was confirmed in Ethan Cole's name, pending a full formal hearing, date to be scheduled, with Voss's office filing a formal statement of federal interest in the minor's welfare and safety for the record. The gavel came down again. The court reporter stopped typing. The room exhaled, not loudly, not with applause or celebration, or any of the cathartic releases that the movies had trained people to expect at moments like this. Just the specific quiet of a room where something enormous has concluded, and everyone inside it needs a moment to understand what shape the world is now. Caleb sat very still at the plaintiff's table. He looked at his hands. Clean, bandaged. June's work, 2 nights ago, careful and quiet and without ceremony. He turned them over and looked at the palms, at the cut across the right one from the bridge embankment concrete, healing now, the kind of scar that would fade to a thin white line within a year, something you'd have to know to look for. Ethan put his hand on Caleb's shoulder, the same way he'd done it on the ledge under the bridge. Solid, present, not gentle, not the performance of gentleness, but certain. The touch of someone who has located you and is communicating, through the physics of the gesture alone, that you are found. Caleb didn't say anything. He put his hand briefly over Ethan's and then took it away because that was as much as he had capacity for right now. In this room, with these fluorescent lights, and this wood paneling, and the smell of old paper, and the court reporter pulling her transcript from the machine, it was enough. Outside, the cold hit them. The crowd in the parking lot read the procession coming down the courthouse steps. The way crowds read outcomes, in the body language, in the arrangement of faces, in the specific quality of how people move when they have come through something rather than been stopped by it. The news camera found Ethan first and then found Caleb, and Caleb kept his eyes forward and kept moving because there was no statement to make and no performance required, and the camera would find its own story regardless. Roach was at the bottom of the steps. He looked at Caleb, looked at Ethan, made a sound that was not quite a word, something low and short that communicated the full weight of the last 48 hours in approximately 1 syllable. And then he turned and walked toward the bikes. June was beside her machine with her arms crossed and her thermos in one hand, watching them come down. When Caleb reached her, she looked at him the way she'd looked at him in the main room 2 nights ago. That medic's attention, the kind that checks the wound beneath the presenting injury. "You okay?" she said. "I don't know yet," he said. She nodded. "That's the right answer." Lily found him by sound, turned her head toward his footsteps on the pavement, and moved towards him with both hands slightly out, not reaching but ready, navigating by the specific acoustic signature of his particular walk that she had apparently already catalogued in the private archive of a child who lived in a world of sound. She stopped in front of him. "Well?" she said. "We're okay," he said. She nodded once, the same single nod her father used, the one that meant "I already knew, but thank you for confirming it." Then she put her hand out, palm up, between them. He looked at it, at her face, at the hospital bracelet still on her wrist that nobody had taken off. He put his hand in hers. She squeezed once and let go. That was all. Hargrove was arrested at 2:17 that afternoon in the parking garage of his office building in the county seat. Two federal agents and a state investigator. The whole thing documented and quiet and devoid of the drama that 9 years of anticipation might have promised. Voss texted Priest with 2 words: done, confirmed. Priest showed the text to Ethan. Ethan read it. He set his phone face down on the main room table and looked at the county map still pinned to the wall. The circle around Hargrove's name in red marker. The clustered zones of documented facilities. The gravel roads and county lines that had been the geography of the last 9 years of his life. He pulled the map off the board. He folded it slowly, along its original creases, and set it on the table. He didn't throw it away. He didn't make any statement about it. He just folded it and set it down, the way you set down something you've been carrying for a very long time, and stood there for a moment, feeling the specific unfamiliar lightness of not holding it anymore. Caleb watched from the doorway. He'd been watching Ethan all day the way he watched things he was trying to understand, not intrusively, not with the clinical distance of someone performing observation, but with the quiet attention of a person learning a new country and trying to map its terrain. He watched how Ethan moved through the compound after the courthouse, how he spoke to the club members who came in through the afternoon with their particular combinations of relief and vigilance and the residual tension of 48 hours of high pressure, how he responded to each person without performance, how he sat with Lily at the kitchen table for 20 minutes doing nothing except drinking coffee and being close to her, how he was, in short, when the emergency was over and the man underneath it had to exist. Caleb filed all of it, in the archive, in the place where he kept the things that mattered. Roach cooked dinner that night. Real dinner. Not eggs and toast, not granola bars, not the emergency provisioning of a household operating on crisis footing. He cooked a pot of chili that had been simmering since 3 in the afternoon and filled the main room with a smell that was so specifically domestic and unhurried that it hit Caleb somewhere he hadn't expected, somewhere below the sternum, in the place where the body keeps its accounting of what it has been denied long enough to stop expecting. People came to the table in ones and twos. June and Wren and Soto and Priest and Decker. Decker, quieter than usual, sitting at the far end, not withdrawn but recalibrated, carrying the specific quality of a man who has done something very hard and is now living in the first hours of the space it created. Nobody made a speech. Nobody toasted. Nobody narrated what had happened or assigned it meaning. They ate chili and bread and drank coffee and spoke in the ordinary registers of people who had been through something together and were now simply being somewhere together. Caleb ate 2 bowls. Roach noticed. Didn't say anything. Ladled a third without being asked and set it down and moved back to the stove. Lily sat beside Caleb and ate with the focused precision of someone who had an efficient relationship with food and did not perform eating for an audience. At some point she said, without preamble, Decker testified. Yeah, Caleb said. That was hard for him. Yeah. Was it worth it? For him, I mean, not for the case. Caleb thought about it, about the text Voss had sent, about 2 kids together in a stable home in the adjacent county, together, which was the only word that mattered. Yeah, he said, I think it was. She considered this. Good, she said, and went back to her chili. Later, after the dishes and the gradual dispersal of the evening, Ethan found Caleb sitting on the wooden steps of the back porch with his jacket on and his hands around a coffee mug, looking at the compound yard in the dark. The bikes under the awning, the amber lamp, the gravel lot with its particular textures of oil stain and tire mark, and the compressed history of everything that had driven across it. Ethan sat beside him. They were quiet for a while in the way they'd been quiet at the hospital window. The companionship of 2 people who had stopped performing for each other somewhere around hour 3 of the night before the hearing and had not started again. The formal guardianship hearing, Ethan said, probably 6 weeks out. Voss's office will file a supporting statement. With Hargrove's network and federal proceedings, the county services apparatus is going to be under scrutiny for a while. The judge who was going to rule against us has his own problems now. He paused. There's going to be a gal appointed, guardian ad litem, someone to represent your interests specifically. You'll have a voice in it. I know what a gal is, Caleb said. Right. Ethan turned his coffee cup in his hands. It's still a process. It still takes time. Nothing about this is... Ethan. Ethan stopped. Caleb looked at him. At the scar on the left jaw. At the flat, careful eyes that held more history than they ever fully showed. I know it takes time, say. It's time, Caleb said. I've been in the system for 3 years. I understand process. He paused. What I'm asking is, he stopped. The word was harder than he expected. What I'm asking is whether you want me here. Not what the court says, not what the gal recommends. Whether you want me here. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. I want you here, he said. No elaboration, no qualification, no architecture of conditions and contingencies. Just the sentence, placed between them the same way Roach placed food, without ceremony, without expectation of a particular response, as a simple statement of what was true. Caleb looked at the yard. His throat was doing something he was not going to address directly. Okay, he said. They sat with that for a while. The cold was deep and real, and the sky above the compound was the specific black of rural dark, the kind that let through stars if you gave it time, and Caleb gave it time, and watched the stars come through one by one, the way things come through when you stop moving long enough to let them. Kandahar, he said, after a while. Ethan went still. You don't have to, Caleb said. I'm not asking you to explain it, He paused. You've been carrying it like it's a debt, like the testifying was paying it back, like the compound and the club and all of it is. He stopped again, choosing words with the care of someone who understood how easily words could close the door they were trying to open. It's not a debt. What happened there? It was a failure by people with more power than you, and they made you carry it, and that's what they did. That's not what you are. A long silence. The wind moved through the yard and stirred the flags on the bike nearest the awning and passed on. You're 14 years old, Ethan said. His voice was very low. You keep saying that, Caleb said. But I think what you mean is that I understand something you're not sure I should understand yet. Ethan looked at the yard, at the bikes, at the lamp casting its amber circle in the dark. Yeah, he said. That's what I mean. I understand it because the system did the same thing to me, Caleb said, on a smaller scale, with less consequence. But the same mechanism. Take a person, remove their context, make them carry something that belongs to the institution, and call it their character. He looked at his hands around the coffee mug. You testified because you wanted to stop it happening to other people, not to pay a debt, because you knew what it felt like and you didn't want. He stopped. He thought about 14 kids from Crestwood. He thought about 2 kids in a cargo vehicle. He thought about himself at 11 years old standing in front of a locked refrigerator, learning for the first time that the people assigned to protect him had a different agenda. You didn't want other people to feel like that, he said. The silence lasted a long time. When Ethan spoke, his voice had the quality of something that had been held under pressure for a very long time, and had finally, in the dark and the cold and the specific safety of 2 people who had decided to stop performing for each other, been allowed to breathe. 4 people, he said, in that compound. A woman and her mother and 2 children. The intelligence said combatants. The intelligence was wrong. I was the ranking medic on scene, and there were 4 minutes, and I made the decisions that I made, and 2 of my guys didn't get the abort in time, and he stopped. I've done the math on those 4 minutes approximately 10,000 times. Every angle, every variable. I cannot find the version where I do something different, and all 4 of them live. Another pause. But I can't find the version where I do something different, and I stop doing the math either. Caleb was very still. You're never going to stop doing the math, he said quietly. No. But you didn't do it for the reasons they said you did. No. Then that's what's true, Caleb said. The rest is what they made you carry. Ethan looked at him. The stars were coming through properly now, the full deep inventory of a rural sky doing its work above a compound in Harlan County on a cold November night, and Caleb looked up at them and felt, in his chest, the specific unfamiliar weight of having said something true and important to someone who needed it, and having had it received. It was a new feeling. He was going to need to get used to new feelings. 3 days later, Ethan took him riding. Not a convoy, not a club run. 2 bikes, Ethan's primary Harley, and a patched-up Sportster that had been sitting in the machine shop bay since Wren had rebuilt the engine 6 months ago and never found a permanent rider for, and which had been quietly serviced and fueled and left near the compound gate the morning before without anyone explicitly saying it was Caleb's, because that was how things happened in this place. Not with speeches, but with the object simply being there. They rode Route 9 south, away from the bridge, away from the county seat, away from the courthouse and the flood water line and the geography of the last 2 weeks. The road opened up into the hill country, pine trees on both sides, the pavement winding through the cold morning fog that sat in the valleys like something the night had left behind, the sky above it pale and clean and enormous. Caleb rode with his hands steady on the throttle and the engine vibrating through his boots and his forearms and the base of his spine, and he understood for the first time what Ethan had meant about things that didn't translate to normal life. The road at speed in cold air was a specific kind of presence. It demanded everything you had and gave back a clarity that was hard to find any other way. It didn't ask anything about your history. It didn't require you to be anyone you'd been before. It just required you to ride. They stopped at a pull-off above a river bend. Not the Coldwater, a different river, quieter, its surface gray-silver under the morning light. Ethan cut the engine and Caleb cut the engine, and the silence arrived around them. Not empty silence, not the silence of absence, but the thick inhabited silence of a world that was continuing its work without them, the birds and the river and the cold moving air. Ethan leaned against his bike and looked at the water. "She wants to teach you Braille," he said. Caleb blinked. "Lily? She says you should understand how she reads, so you can read the same books." He paused. "I didn't suggest it. That was her idea." Caleb looked at the river. "Okay," he said. A long pause. "There's a school in town," Ethan said. "Good enough, not excellent. Roach used to teach there, shop class, 10 years ago, before he retired and became a full-time terrible cook." He paused. "They have a strong mathematics program. Priest looked into it. He looked into it 3 days ago, while you were sleeping." Ethan looked at the water. Nobody asked him to. He just did. Caleb thought about Priest with his prosthetic hand and his precise military handwriting and his phone calls at 3 in the morning. About Roach and the granola bar placed without ceremony in a hospital waiting room. About June cleaning wounds without asking how they happened. About Wren in the flannel shirt and the simple declarative sentence, "It gets cold in the back rooms." About all the small acts that don't look like anything from a distance and are everything up close. "Why mathematics?" he said. "Because Wren saw your documentation work," Ethan said. "The LLC registrations, the placement chain, the timing analysis. He said you were doing higher-level pattern recognition without any formal training." He paused. "He said it was remarkable." Caleb said nothing. He looked at the river. "I never had anyone look at what I was good at before," he said. "They looked at what I cost." Ethan was quiet. "You don't cost anything here," he said. "That's not how this works." The river moved. A bird crossed the gray sky above the bend, low and fast, intent on somewhere. Caleb watched it until it disappeared into the tree line. "I keep waiting for the thing that changes it," he said. "The condition I didn't know about. The thing that makes it—" He stopped. "I keep waiting for the locked refrigerator." "I know," Ethan said. "How do you stop waiting for it?" A long pause. The river moved. The cold moved. "You don't stop," Ethan said. "Not completely, but it gets quieter." He looked at the water. "And after a while you start to notice that the thing you've been waiting for hasn't come, and you start to build on that, on the not coming." He paused. "It's slow. It doesn't happen like a door opening. It happens like the river. You look one day and it's moved, and you didn't see the moment it did." Caleb looked at the water for a long time. He thought about the ledge, about the hand reaching blindly through the dark toward a voice. He thought about staying. "Okay," he said. They stood there for a while longer, the two of them and the 2 bikes and the river below and the cold morning pressing down from above, not saying anything, not needing to. The specific companionship of 2 people who had found each other at the worst possible time in the worst possible circumstances, and were standing now, together, in the aftermath. Eventually, Ethan straightened and put on his helmet. Caleb put on his. They rode back the way they'd come, north on Route 9, the fog burning off now as the morning took hold, the pine trees on both sides giving way gradually to the first outskirts of Harlan County. A gas station, a closed hardware store, the water tower with the county name in peeling paint, the bridge. They crossed the bridge. Caleb looked straight ahead. He did not look at the embankment. He did not look at the water. He crossed the bridge and felt the grating under his tires and kept his hand steady and kept going, and the bridge was behind him before he had time to make anything of it, and the road ahead was ordinary and continuing and going somewhere. The compound was awake when they pulled in, the machine shop running, the smell of fresh coffee through the main building's ventilation, Lily on the back porch with a book in her lap that she was reading with her fingertips, her head tilted toward the sound of the engines as they came down the gravel road. She smiled when she heard them, not with relief, not with the complicated gratitude of someone who had needed them to return, just the clean, simple smile of someone who had been listening for a particular sound and heard it exactly when she expected to. Caleb cut the engine and sat for a moment on the bike in the gravel lot and looked at the compound. The corrugated walls, the hawk silhouette on the east wall, the awning, the amber lamp now on in the gray morning light, the smoke from the chimney, the coffee smell, and felt the specific vertiginous quality of looking at somewhere that was starting to look like somewhere. Not home yet. Not the word. Not the full weight of it. That was river slow, the way Ethan had said. It would move without him seeing the moment. But the direction was right. He got off the bike. Lily heard his boots on the gravel and turned her head. "You came back different," she said. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe a little." She considered this with her 9 and 40-year-old gravity. Then she turned back to her book and ran her fingertips across the raised dots and read whatever she was reading, and Caleb stood in the gravel lot of the Iron Road compound in Harlan County on a cold November morning, with the engine still ticking behind him and the coffee smell coming through the walls and the sound of the machine shop and boots on wooden floors and the ordinary inhabited music of a place that was continuing without drama or announcement, and he stood inside it and breathed. No sirens. No river. No running. Just the road behind him and the gravel under his boots and the amber light above the awning burning patient and steady against the gray morning sky. And somewhere inside him, in the archive where he kept the things that mattered, beside his mother's face mid-laugh, beside a small hand gripping his wrist in the dark, beside a granola bar placed without ceremony on a plastic hospital chair, he added this: the sound of an engine cutting out in a gravel lot, the smell of coffee through a metal wall, a girl reading with her fingertips, and the specific quiet of a world that, for the first time in 3 years, was not asking him to disappear.